And Vadim is just logging in here so that we can stream this event on YouTube so that everybody can see it. But maybe just to start things off here as we get ready to kick off the event in the next 30 seconds or so, if people can type in the chat where they're joining us from, and maybe if you could tell us why you decided to come to this event today. Of course, we are talking about how to stand out to tech employers, how to get interviews in tech in particular. That is our industry that we have an expertise around. So hopefully you're here for that. But we're wondering if there's any particular reason that motivated you to come to this event today. Anything specific that you were looking to learn, please share that with us in the chat, because we'd love to hear from you, and maybe that'll help set the stage for this conversation, this dialogue. We want to make sure you're all getting out of this as much as we possibly can in the next 45 minutes to an hour or so that we have with you. So we encourage you to be active in the chat if you wish to do so, and if you want us to dive deeper into any particular topic at all. And you're muted, Vadim.
Thank you, Sergey. Just so you folks know, there is a chat feature and a Q&A feature. Use whichever you like. We will monitor both. So again, you can either drop it into the chat. The benefit of the chat also is if you share with everybody, everybody will see it. But you can drop your questions into the chat, and maybe somebody else had the same question as you, so that would be helpful. As questions come in, we will make sure to address as many of them as possible. All right, so welcome to School 16. Thank you everybody for joining us today. We're starting to see some comments come into the chat, so would love to hear more. And Sunil, welcome from Nassau County, Long Island. Congrats on graduating with a master's degree. You're in the right place if you're looking for a tech job now. Again, you're talking to us. We're at School 16 here, where we help develop skills for people that are interested in being non-technical operators in tech. We've actually had plenty of engineers that we worked with as well, so it doesn't mean you have to be non-technical, but the skills that we develop are specifically focused around non-technical functions and to improve that side of your skill set. Today specifically, we're going to be talking about how to stand out to tech employers to land interviews, because it is a pretty competitive landscape out there right now. And there are certain things that you can do to use your time effectively to make sure that you're getting in front of employers, or if you currently have a job, to make sure that you are being seen as someone that you should be promoted, for example, when an opportunity comes about internally as well. There are tactical ways of going about this, and we want to make sure that we educate you on some of this today.
Now, really quickly, if you're sitting here watching this and wondering who are these guys, Sergey and Vadim Revzin, why are they talking to me right now? We are both the co-founders and co-executive directors of School 16. We started this organization because we really believe in technology as a career path that creates really the most opportunities and flexibility for people. And we believe that most organizations, including higher ed institutions out there, are not properly preparing people for jobs in tech, and are really not even helping people figure out how to navigate those jobs and how to position themselves in a way that increases the likelihood of getting hired. That is, to us, the mission of School 16, the mission of what we want to do. And this is why we offer free events like this to the public, and why we offer the classes and the programs that we do. This is one of our events that we have. Vadim and I like to host these and share what we've learned in over a decade in tech across a lot of different roles. I've been in sales roles. I've run sales teams. I've run venture capital funds, invested in startups. We've been lecturers and professors. Vadim has run product management teams that he's transitioned from sales to product to other leadership roles. And so we have a lot of experience both getting into tech, but then getting leadership opportunities in tech and transitioning careers throughout in the tech industry, because there is a lot of flexibility in the industry. And that's really what we want to bring, the knowledge that we want to bring to people. But we also host events pretty much every other week where we'll bring in, let's say a couple of weeks ago, we had a director of product from PayPal who spoke. We have sales leaders, marketing leaders, essentially people that can help you figure out how to break into the industry without necessarily having, a whole track record of experience or years that you spend on developing experience just to break in. So that's really what we're going to be talking about here today. So we're going to move on here to the agenda just so you can see what the conversation is. That was just a little intro from Vadim and I about ourselves. You're in good hands. We're here to answer any questions that you have, regardless of what job you might be interested in, because again, we have done it all in terms of getting into the tech industry and navigating the various aspects and roles. But essentially, right now, you can see what the agenda is. The next 45 minutes or so, we're going to be talking about really what we think are the most practical ways to stand out to employers and things that we wish we knew 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 15 years ago when we first graduated college, but then we were transitioning careers and really trying to get opportunities, trying to increase our salary potential, trying to get promotions, all these things that, if you have someone smart in your family that can give you advice on it, that's great. Or a smart friend that can give you advice, that's great. But there really isn't any formal education, at least in America, about how to go about doing this. And this is what we decided to do here at School 16 and what we're going to focus on in this event. So we're going to separate it into 3 core areas that we believe can be helpful for people to break into technology jobs without much experience. First, we're going to talk about how to actually gain practical knowledge that's valued by employers, and how to rapidly develop the skills that will actually increase the likelihood of somebody looking at your resume and giving you a chance when you're reaching out to them to talk to you. Number 2, we'll talk about how to develop your own area of expertise where somebody looks at you and your background and can immediately say, by looking at your resume or by talking to you for 5 minutes, they can immediately say, okay, this is her expertise. Again, even regardless of how much experience you have, even if you just had a couple internships in the last couple of years in college, or you've been a teacher for the last 20 years and you're trying to transition into tech, we want to help you figure out how to package that narrative to say, this is my expertise, this is how you should why you should hire me. And then finally, we're going to talk about why demonstrating an ability to be a self-starter is really important. Now, probably you've heard the term self-starter many times in the past, and it may mean different things to you depending on your context, depending on how much experience you have. But that being said, in particular in the technology industry, and in particular in fast-growing technology startup companies where a lot of people want to work, showing that you're a self-starter and being able to demonstrate how you've been a self-starter is actually really valued by employers. And we're going to talk about how to demonstrate that in your background, in your conversations, interviews, so that people, again, are drawn to you and they want to give you opportunities. That's really what it's all about. Standing out to tech employers is how do you get people to give you opportunities. So this is the main things that we're going to talk about today. So now we want to start this conversation off by, before we actually dive into the sort of first thing that we want to do, which is dispel some myths that people have. We do want to mention in the next slide here, Vadim, if you can move on, that we're currently in a recruiting cycle for our technology career acceleration program. It's starting on June 21st. So if you want to dive deep into any of these topics and you actually want to learn how to position your resume, work directly with people that are in these jobs, with leaders that are doing this work day to day, we do have a program that's 2 months part-time this is the last week that we're taking applications for this program, where you get to learn directly from the experts. So you learn marketing from somebody that runs a marketing team at a startup. You learn product from somebody that runs a product team at a technology company. And this is a 2-month program where we focus on all the various non-technical roles, and we work directly with each student to help them position their background and experience to fit those roles. So if you're looking for some structure and you're looking for some help beyond an event like this, where you can really work closely in a cohort-based experience to get opportunities and position yourself for these roles, we encourage you to apply to our program. We're really just taking interviews for the next couple of days because the program is almost full, but we do want to mention that we have a couple spots left here for the cohort that starts on June 21st. And you can apply at school16.co/program. The application itself takes about 2 or 3 minutes. And then all we do is we interview each person to make sure they could be a good fit for the cohort. So encourage you to apply to that today if you want to be considered for that program.
And Sergey, just making sure, can you hear me okay here? My connection seems to be a little bit spotty today.
Yeah, I can hear you well.
Okay, sounds great, folks. And I'm going to drop that link into the chat as well. If for some reason something's wrong with my connection, just so you know, we may pause for a second here so that I can hand over the controls to Sergey, and he will run the slides from there. So, but I think we get started. Anything else, Sergey, before we move on?
No, I'm ready to go on. But folks, if you have any questions about anything that pops up here, anything that I just said, please do pop it into the chat. It's great to see folks from Brooklyn. Natasha, she's going to be joining our next cohort. Welcome, Natasha. Belen here from Buenos Aires. Very nice. Awesome. Thank you so much for joining us all the way from there. It's great to see. And of course, we're happy to provide this event for all of you. Let's start things off, though, by talking about some common misconceptions, because, you know, I think that regardless of how much experience that you might have, whether it's in tech, outside of tech, or you're just graduating and looking for these roles, we get a lot of bad advice, unfortunately, in life about jobs and careers and how to go about them. And we want to start dispelling what some of those common misconceptions are, so that you're not sort of blinded by bad advice that you may have gotten over the years. And so if you can move on to the next slide, Vadim, great. First of all, we want to talk about the misconceptions around qualifications. Of course, the more experience you have makes it a little bit easier to get job opportunities. But that being said, one misconception that we see people make over and over again, the mistake that we see people make over and over again, is they only think that listing full-time jobs on their resume, that's really the only thing that you can list. Anything else that you've done outside of your full-time job, your side projects, small businesses that you've started, consulting that you've done, friends that you've helped, you know, with their various projects, they think that that stuff can't be put on the resume. We're here to tell you that oftentimes the things that you have done on the side are actually some of the most exciting things that you should add in your resume, and that's what employers will care about. And a lot of people are missing that because they decide not to put that on their resumes, but oftentimes it's the most exciting thing. So that's number one. You may have awesome things that you've worked on that just wasn't a full-time job. You should be adding that to your resume if it helps tell a story of why you're qualified for a particular job. So that's number one. Number two, a lot of people think that, you know, if I don't have a rich aunt or rich uncle or mom or dad, then really that's the extent of my network. I'm not born into a good network, therefore I don't have a good network, and that's just my life. And again, I want to dispel that notion. Most people, including the most successful people that you see in your life, who walk around with a huge Rolodex, to use an old term, or they look like they have thousands of connections on LinkedIn. They're just a super connector. Everybody knows them. Everyone starts from very close to nothing or zero. Of course, some people have family members, friends that they can lean on. It gives them a little bit of an advantage. But I can tell you the vast majority of people and successful people that I've seen in my career start off with almost no network. And you can develop your network from scratch by doing cold outreach, by asking people for introductions, by showing value to people. That we talk a lot about that at School 16 in all of our classes that we teach, which is that you can go outside of your immediate network to start developing your network. And that oftentimes pays dividends faster than you thought. So that's another huge myth we want to dispel.
And a quick pause, Sergey, before you move on to the last piece, is a question that came in from Sunil John. Does freelance work count as work experience? Absolutely, freelance work counts as work experience. And both Sergey and myself have had years where we were just freelancing between, let's say, full-time job opportunities. And oftentimes, even, you know, having a less of a time commitment to freelance work, you might not be doing 40 hours a week in freelance work, maybe doing 10 hours a week, but it's more about how you position your experience and the freelance projects that you've worked on for that next opportunity. Not every freelance job you may have had or project is relevant for that next role. So sometimes it's important to pick and choose what you talk about when you're talking about your background. But yes, freelance work counts just the same, if not more in some cases, right? Depending on the type of job that you had, than full-time work.
Absolutely. So if you have an opportunity to do some contracting work, even if it's one freelance project in between jobs, because you haven't had a job for a while, take those opportunities, because those stories can be sometimes even more relevant than a full-time job that you had in the past. Absolutely true. And that goes back to the last point, which we want to make here about a common misconception, which is that you need years and years of experience to get most opportunities. Sure, there are very senior roles out there that want a certain amount of years of experience. Sure, there are very technical roles out there that, you just need certain technical aptitude and years of experience with certain systems to be a valuable contributor to a team. But the vast majority of jobs in tech, and a lot of, quite high paying, relatively entry roles in tech, when I say entry level high paying, I mean, let's say $50,000 to $70,000 for somebody that's not super experienced. Those roles don't necessarily require years of a particular experience or a particular certification. They just require for you to be able to package how the experience that you do have, whether it's X amount of months or just a few years, into saying how it's relevant for that role. So again, there are a lot of roles out there. We're going to touch on many of them today that don't require years of experience just to get your foot in the door. But of course, it will require for you to be able to talk intelligently about how your background is relevant, even if that background is minimal or part-time, etc. So those are three main things that we wanted to dispel for folks today. If you've been frustrated because you thought that those things are all true, we're here to tell you that hopefully after this, you can kind of shift your mindset a little bit, knowing that they're not necessarily always true and there's ways around it.
Excellent. And before we move on, because we have a lot to cover, if anyone has any other questions they want to address off the bat, or other assumptions that you may have had, or myths that maybe you believe in right now that you'd like us to disprove or challenge, feel free again to drop it in the chat, okay?
Great. The first thing we wanted to talk about is gaining practical knowledge and skills for specific roles. Now, we're talking about here how you don't need much experience or years of experience, but of course, any experience that you can point to that shows that you have a particular area that you understand really well or have done work around, or a skill set that you developed, you should try to surface. And if you're in this situation right now that you're looking at your resume or you're looking at your LinkedIn and you're thinking to yourself, I don't really have that much, then your job for the next 3 months or 6 months is to figure out how to add things or create those experiences for yourself. We're going to talk about that a little bit later, how to create those experiences for yourself to be able to demonstrate that practical knowledge and skills. But of course, in the beginning, you have to figure out, well, how am I going to narrow it down? For a lot of people, initially understanding, well, what should I dive deep into is the hardest part. And the worst thing you can do is, somebody told you should become a data analyst, or somebody told you need to become a coder. And so you go down a rabbit hole trying to become a developer or trying to become a data analyst, even if you hate math, just because you think you're going to make a lot of money. Don't go by what you think you'll make a lot of money on, because again, if you're not naturally good at that thing, or you don't have the curiosity and the aptitude to develop those deep, technical skills, you're probably barking up the wrong tree. And it's going to take you a long time to realize that it's not for you. And ultimately you come out the other end being frustrated. So first, you want to ask yourself the questions to start to narrow down what practical knowledge and skills you're going to focus on developing or surfacing when you're talking to employers. And these are just some questions that you can ask yourself to start narrowing that down. So for example, are you somebody that's really naturally organized? You're the person in your family or friend group that everybody goes to organize anything because you're just naturally good at that. You like to do it. You're an operational systems oriented thinker, right? You're kind of a natural project manager. If that is your natural aptitude and you just enjoy doing that in any kind of project, then you may start narrowing down your skill set there to focus around jobs around operations, project management, program management, those kind of jobs, because that's maybe your skill set, or maybe that's really what you've developed as a skill set as you've done the different jobs you've done. Are you somebody that is a natural organizer or a community leader? For example, were you the person in school or in college that always was, organizing all the events for your club, and the one that made sure that, you actually were communicating to the different people in the group and making sure that a bunch of people would show up to the event, etc.? Again, there's a lot of community-oriented roles out there in tech. For example, community management type of roles, or general management type of roles in startups and technology companies that'll really value that experience. Event management as well, that will really value those kind of experiences. Are you somebody that's customer oriented or customer service oriented, right? So even if you've had, let's say, call center jobs or customer service types of jobs in the past, you can use those jobs to then be able to position yourself for a role in tech that has customer focused language around it when you read those types of job descriptions. And so that's going to be really important. If you think you're someone that's customer oriented, there's customer success jobs, there's account management jobs, and customer service jobs that you can then apply for, because people will see you have a track record for being a customer facing person, even if it's not that much experience that you've really had. Then next, for example, do you like digging into difficult technical problems? So maybe you've had internships in the past where, you know, there was a problem with the website and you went in and you figured out how to use WordPress just so you could fix that problem yourself and not bother the engineers, right? Well, then you might want to dig into some of those product management types of roles that require a little bit of technical know-how and understanding, or maybe sales engineering types of roles, and start looking at those jobs and start seeing what kind of skills do they value and how can I be the person that they want to hire to solve those particular problems. Understand, are you the kind of person who likes to promote things and grab people's attention, right? Those could be marketing oriented or sales oriented types of roles. You know, are you somebody that's really good at writing, right? So you start to see here in these questions ways for you to start to really narrow for yourself, where will I go deep and start to really develop a expertise around, where I can really brand myself as the person that's good at that thing. And then I can focus my job search around that, because now I've developed a skill set and stories around why somebody should hire me for these roles. And again, looking at these questions, hopefully you can see that you don't have to have years of experience to be able to say, yes, I'm customer oriented. Yes, I'm a good writer. Yes, I'm an operations and project management systems oriented thinker. You don't need years of experience, but you do need specific projects or things that you have done that can point to your ability to do that.
Well, Sergey and I believe that one of the best ways to learn is through other people's examples and stories. So we'll share a few quick stories about how we personally have been able to gain some of that practical knowledge to get good opportunities in tech. For me personally, when I was transitioning careers from finance, I decided that sales was a good way to get your foot in the door into a tech company. But applying to different tech jobs, even though I had an internship in college where I did some sales work or a little bit, as I was applying to these jobs, I was not hearing back. I was not even getting an interview. And I realized I needed something else that would make me look like an expert, that would position me better in front of these prospective employers, because clearly other people are getting interviews and it was an entry level role. And so I was fortunate enough where I had a friend who worked at a startup, and he just raised a little bit of money. I think it was $300,000, just enough to pay himself and a couple of co-founders, and maybe hire one other person. But I also knew they had a product that they were selling, and maybe they could use my help. In this case, of course, I had a contact, but I reached out to him and I asked him if I could volunteer for him, where he pays me nothing up front, or really nothing at all, where I can work with him for a couple hours after work for 3 days a week, in exchange for his VP of sales sitting on the calls with me and giving me direct and raw feedback so that I could learn as quickly as possible what I was doing wrong. I did that work. He luckily agreed. I did that work for 3 months. 3 months later, I was able to package that as experience on my resume, and almost immediately, just because I could now clearly, intelligently speak to that experience that I had, I was able to get interviews. That within a couple of months, I landed a job with a formal sales training program that over the next 6 months, the company really invested in making me good at sales with a good salary and everything to boot. So one example of how I was able to find an opportunity for me to gain those practical skills very quickly. Similarly, when I was transitioning to working more with engineers and going towards more product-oriented role, I found out about sales engineering, where you're essentially doing the technical sale of a product, but you're not necessarily owning a quota, and you can make a really good base salary off of that plus bonus. And so how did I become more technical? It was just a matter of me in my sales role, volunteering.
Looks like, Vadim, you're getting a little bit delayed here with the connection.
Company to take on certain technical.
Sorry about that, folks. It looks like Vadim's connection is a little bit slow here, so let's see if I can jump in. Okay, I'll jump in here. It looks like I'm hearing a little bit of feedback coming from Vadim. I wasn't sure if he was done speaking, but if you missed what he just said, essentially what he was talking about is how he was able to get into a more technical sales role, which actually paid much more. And I'll kind of sum up that story because I remember exactly how he did it, which is he saw that in a lot of the sales engineering type of job descriptions, even though he didn't have to be technical, some knowledge and understanding of HTML, JavaScript, CSS was important. He knew he didn't have time to go and learn how to code, but he decided to start playing around with a content management system like WordPress and build his own website on WordPress. We don't really have to be technical to do that. There is a little bit of a learning curve, but you don't have to be technical to do it. And it took him about 3 months to build that website. I remember because I was helping him build it. And through that process, he learned a little bit about HTML, how to edit HTML code, a little bit about CSS, how to edit CSS code, not how to write it from scratch, but how to edit it in, let's say, a WordPress theme to be able to have the website do what he wanted it to do. And so just spending 3 months on building his own website, he was able to then package that and talk about that on his resume and say, hey, look, I'm a salesperson, but I've also become technical over time, and I can do this sales engineering job for you. And then he got promoted. Once he got the sales engineering job, he actually ended up getting promoted to product management and then a product leader job where he ran the entire product development process and really was the person that engineers relied on to make product decisions. So he went from not being technical at all to being able to essentially manage engineers in a product management process just by working on building a website for a few months and then learning the rest on the job, right? So you really just need to develop enough skills to get your foot in the door, and then you can learn the rest on the job. And I did something very similar when I was working for a nonprofit running programs for them. I worked for Venture for America running entrepreneurship programs for them. And I wanted to get into venture capital. That was my long-term goal, to start investing in startups. And the way that I went about it is I took on internal projects to make myself a little bit more and more technical as an investor. I went from coaching entrepreneurs to finally starting to give investment advice to entrepreneurs. And then when the opportunity came in my company, when the leader of the company, the founder, wanted to start an internal venture capital fund, I volunteered to spend my nights and weekends essentially to help him put together that venture capital fund. And because there was nobody else in the company that volunteered to do this work, I was the go-to person in creating the fund. And when it came time to actually start making investments from the fund, I was the go-to person who was charged with making investments as well. And I was able to use that experience to then get a venture capital investing job at running technology investments at New York University, because they were looking for an experienced investor and entrepreneur and somebody who had experience working in startups as well. So again, sometimes you can take your current role and volunteer for certain projects in your current company or internship or side project that you're doing in order to then be able to leverage that for the job that you actually want.
And the main point here is you have to be able to prove the skills that you are boasting about yourself when you are talking to employers. And that is why you're investing your time into actually taking on these responsibilities. That's the best way to acquire these skills and to actually be able to speak intelligently to your ability to do these things is to do them on the job or to do it through side projects.
Great. Any questions here that folks have? It looks like Sunil had another question on whether technical certifications from Google or Coursera matter much, or much than not having any technical certifications on your resume. It really depends, Sunil, on the job you're going after. There are some, specific, let's say, administrative jobs in tech that require certain certifications. So, for example, if you're going to work anywhere with a Salesforce product as a Salesforce administrator, you might need a certification to get that job. The jobs that we're talking about here, marketing, sales, operations, and even product management, they don't require any specific certifications. Certainly at School 16, we have certification programs. So if you go through our program, you get a general business technology certification that you can use. But it's more about the nuances of how to apply your background and tell the right stories to an employer than really about showing any kind of specific certification. It can help. It's not going to be a silver bullet where all of a sudden you get interviews because you have a certification.
And part of the reason for that is because you may look at a different job with different requirements, and these different roles will need different certifications. So if you change directions, something that you may have invested time in may no longer be relevant. So if you're saying, yes, I want to be a project manager, that's all I want to do, then I would say might make sense for you to get your PMP and invest your time in that. But if you have a wider area of interest, then oftentimes those professional certifications are better to get once you're in a role and the company is saying, hey, we want you to study this so that you can get promoted.
Great. All right, so moving on to the next part is really once you've gotten some of these skills, right? So you've actually gone ahead and maybe spent a couple of months like Vadim, doing something on the side or working on your own project, like the one that Vadim described in order to get those opportunities. How do you actually display it then to someone in a way that convinces them that you have the skills, even if you spend 3 months or 6 months working on something? Well, first of all, and when you're looking at, we're talking about here specifically the less technical roles, they typically fall in a few different buckets. One is either you're in a revenue generating role, right? So marketing and sales and even customer success, for example, these are 3 types of roles that really fall into the I make money for the company, right? So revenue, I make money for the company types of roles. Then there's the product or builder type of roles, right? So you either sell it or you build it, really the second one, second bucket. And those, again, you don't have to be technical, but any kind of product management job where you're working with engineers, even project management roles where you're helping, let's say, prioritize various decisions that a company is making in terms of product rollouts, et cetera. Those are really the build it type of roles. And then finally, operations, that would be kind of the third vertical. Those are the roles that are kind of keeping the trains running on time, right? And some of those types of skill sets. So number one is figuring out, how do I display, the kind of minimum baseline of competence or competency in either a revenue function, an operations function, or a product function, depending on my various expertise. And we're just showing you here a couple of different examples here that can help you use the right adjectives to show that, you either are revenue focused, so you know how to drive interest, you know how to grow an audience, you know how to get eyeballs to a certain website, right? How to get people's attention. Operations, meaning something that demonstrates process, systems orientation, experience implementing systems, saving time for an organization, et cetera. And then product-oriented roles oftentimes have to do with understanding how to take customer insights and translate them to product decisions, or having an experience working with and managing engineers, right? Even if you weren't in a startup managing engineers, but you were managing technical people in another capacity, that still speaks to your ability to add value right away in a product role. So if you look at some of these examples here, right? Launched a startup from concept to prototype in 1 weekend. That's one quick bullet point. We're just showing you an example, kind of a extreme example of something that you can include in your resume or in your LinkedIn, that even, let's say, maybe you just worked on a project for a weekend or a couple of weeks where you built a startup, right? We've used experiences like that in the past when we were starting off in tech to show that we have an ability to rapidly get something off the ground. So if you launch a startup from concept to prototype, you probably did marketing activities there. You built out potentially a website to get people to go to that website and sign up for something, right? That's a great story that you can tell to demonstrate that you've developed that skill set around, let's say, marketing. A couple other examples here: manage a team of contract engineers and designers to develop a minimum viable product, right? And getting a few customers. So maybe if you helped a friend who was developing a prototype for something, and you help them hire a couple engineers on, on freelancer type of websites that you paid $1,000 to. Sounds like a tiny project, wasn't even really maybe a real business. It just got a couple of customers, but that is a story that you can now tell, that you actually spent time figuring out how to recruit and manage engineers for this project, right? And that is a really important story that employers are really going to care about. An example here of organizing a community of people, right, around a seminar series or an event. When I was starting off in tech, I decided to start hosting events as a way to show that I have the ability to organize people, that I can get people to come to something, that I can get speakers, and I can have a compelling event and something I can do for an organization. Again, that is not a full-time job that I had, but that was a real way that I could demonstrate my organizational abilities and attach a real number of people to it that I engaged to get something done. And again, that shows that you have the ability to create something from nothing, which for tech employers in particular is really, really something that they look for and can really help you stand out.
I think the main takeaway here is it's not enough to just acquire these skills. You also need to think really carefully about how you are positioning yourself for the opportunities that you want. And if you do it the right way, you're almost guaranteed to at least get your foot in the door for certain roles. I also think there's probably some people in this class right now that already have the skills. Maybe they lack a little bit of the confidence, but have the skills to start pursuing opportunities. Maybe you just haven't packaged your skills and background yet in the exact right way that makes an employer or somebody that might want to give you an opportunity see the potential. And so remember how you talk about yourself and how you display your actual skills in your cover letter, in your custom email to a co-founder that you're looking to get a job at a company where you're looking to get a job, on your resume. All these things are incredibly important and could be small tweaks that could actually have a major impact on you getting your foot in the door with opportunities.
And this is something that we talk about again extensively in all of our programs and classes, which is how do you actually learn how to tell those stories about yourself that get somebody to listen and get somebody to give you a chance? Because that's really the most important thing here, right? If you, again, like if you help your friend do something like create even an Instagram account that ended up getting 1,000 followers, right? And you were a part of that. A lot of people don't feel like they should talk about that because it's not relevant. But in fact, that, if packaged in the right way, can be the most exciting story that employers are going to care about the most. So that's really the main takeaway here is learn how to display your skills and talk about yourself in a way that impresses people, and don't shortchange yourself. Most people undersell themselves and undersell their accomplishments. It's important to really reflect on what was your true contribution to the various projects you've done, and how can you then package this in a way that not undersells yourself, but really sells your true abilities as an individual. The next thing we want to talk about is the importance of developing and leveraging a domain expertise. Now, we know that this is not necessarily the easiest thing to do when you don't have much experience, or if you're transitioning into tech and you haven't really spent much time in the industry. How do you brand yourself as an expert, right? Well, again, it is not something that requires years of experience. It is something that requires consistency in how you position yourself and your sort of, we hear this term all the time, personal brand, right? What does that even mean, personal brand? I'm a human, not a brand. Well, it's true. You're a human, you're complicated, your experiences are not uniform, but there's a way to talk about your experiences that makes somebody understand this is what this person is all about. This is what this person cares about. This is what they're good at. And I know that if I bring them into my organization, they're really going to own this part of the organization because this is what they care about. This is what they know. This is what they spend their time diving deep into. So we encourage you to make some decisions for yourself. For a lot of people, the reason why they struggle so much is because they're actually super indecisive when it comes to actually having a niche and having a focus and being able to talk about themselves and their interests. Now, it can change. It can change over time, right? Me and Vadim, we've had a podcast for the last couple of years. Before we started that podcast, we did not brand ourselves as podcasting experts. I can tell you overnight, a month after we started working on that podcast, we started going to events and talking about our expertise in podcasting. And eventually it became a self-fulfilling prophecy where the podcast grew. And all of a sudden we had people coming to us for advice around podcasting. Now, we don't talk about the podcast that much nowadays because it's not that important to our story. Well, sometimes it is, but I can tell you that a year ago, right, I was talking about it a lot because that was part of my narrative. It was part of my brand. And sometimes even now I bring it up if it's important in conversation. So again, it can change over time how you brand yourself. For me, a couple of years ago, it was important to brand myself as a storyteller. So I talked about the podcast, but it can change over time as well. You do want to make some decisions in the near term. How are you going to brand yourself? So some questions to ask. What are things that you're deeply interested in, right? It sounds like a funny thing to say in a career conversation, but what are things that you spend a lot of your free time online researching? That could be an expertise. I mean, even something simple, you love fashion and you spend all your free time reading fashion blogs. I can tell you, if you spend even 40 hours reading fashion material over the last year, you're probably more of an expert in fashion and retail than most people out there. And you can brand yourself as an expert in that. So again, go along with that. What do you spend a lot of your free time thinking about and general interest in doing research about? What kind of content do you spend a lot of your time consuming? Again, also on your free time. It doesn't have to be only professional type of content. It could be things that you're personally curious about. For example, did you spend a lot of time growing up within your family with a small business, and because of that, you care a lot about small businesses, and you gave a lot of your friends who have restaurants advice as well? Well, now you are an expert in small businesses, and maybe you can go work for a tech company that serves small businesses because you spent the better part of your childhood and your free time helping people with small restaurants and small businesses. And there's a lot of technology companies out there that serve small businesses, so that could be your niche. And then the final way to think about it is, where do I have a deep network, right? I mean, if I spent the last 20 years of my life as a teacher, maybe I want to consider going into education technology to companies that serve teachers, because I intimately know the problems in day-to-day of what teachers face, and I will have the empathy to be able to do that job effectively. Start asking yourself those questions, because even if you don't think that you have an expertise in anything, or you're transitioning into tech and your previous expertise is irrelevant, in fact, it probably is relevant, and it can help narrow down your search.
The biggest reason why we're talking about the importance of developing your domain expertise is it's one of the biggest pieces of leverage that you can use to stand out to tech employers. Tech companies love hiring people that are career transitioners. They love hiring people that have been successful, or at least have gone deep in other industries. And if they think that they can use your brain to serve their customer better, if they're serving the same customers that come from the experience that you have, or maybe serve their team better because of a particular domain expertise that you developed, they are that much more likely to give you the time of day and want to connect with you to learn more. So one of the best things that you can do is, if you have some domain expertise that you've developed, focus your job search, focus your opportunity search on organizations that serve somehow or are tangentially related to that domain expertise. You will beat out a lot of the competition that might even have more direct tech experience, but does not have that domain expertise. That is your competitive advantage in that situation.
One quick example here, we had a gentleman named Jeffrey Love speak to a group just like this actually a few months ago, and he is someone that started off in nonprofit sector. You would think, how do you get a job in tech if you come from nonprofits? Well, he started applying to companies whose clients were nonprofits, and he found this technology company in Boston called HubSpot that was starting to sell their products to nonprofits, and they were hiring a customer success manager, so somebody to essentially help people buy their products, that was specifically targeting nonprofits as the customer. Because of his experience working for nonprofits, they knew that he'd be able to understand their problems and serve them as a customer, and so they hired him. And he started off in the nonprofit sector, just serving nonprofits as part of this technology company. Within 1 year, he was helping run the nonprofit section of the department. And within 2 or 3 years, they promoted him to actually running an overall customer success team, not just serving nonprofits, but outside of nonprofit customers as well. And now he's a customer success leader, where he has several people several people reporting to him that run all sorts of customer success teams in HubSpot, which is now a public company, right? So he rose through the ranks several times over by first getting his foot in the door. And Vadim just dropped a link in the chat from that recording if you want to check it out. But first, he got his foot in the door by saying, hey, my domain expertise is nonprofits. You should hire me because I know what your customers need, to then proving himself in that role. And now his domain expertise is he's a customer success leader at startups and technology companies. And he does really well for himself. So there's a way to get your foot in the door by developing and leveraging that expertise, even if you don't have years and years of experience. So just to move on now, definitely check out that link that Vadim dropped there, because it could be really helpful for you. The next thing we want to talk about is how to actually display that domain expertise as well, right? So we talk about how you develop skills, you display those skills, how do you develop a domain expertise, and now we want to talk about how to display it. It sounds like maybe Vadim, the slides are frozen for you, so let me perhaps share my screen here. I'm just going to share my screen so that we don't have to worry about the delays here. Just a second. Great. So hopefully everyone here now can see my screen. Thumbs up, Vadim. All right, good. I see the thumbs up, awesome. And Vadim will monitor the chat in case something else comes in here while I share the screen here. But really quickly, once you figure out what is the area that you want to focus on, what is that area of expertise, how do you actually display that knowledge? Well, again, you want to make sure you're specific, right? So if you're nonprofits, or if you come from education background, you want to be able to tell specific stories that show and demonstrate your expertise in that area. What is it about nonprofits that's really hard, right? I'm sure he had to talk about that in his interview, because again, that would demonstrate why he actually understands the problem. If you've worked in retail for the last 3 or 4 years, don't just go into an interview or an application for an interview saying, "Hey, yeah, I mean, I've been in retail for 5 years, so I can be, great for you for customer service." That doesn't tell me anything. That tells me that you've worked, but it doesn't tell me. It doesn't actually demonstrate to me, display to me what is your real expertise around retail. So in that experience, talk about the specific problems that you faced as someone in retail. Talk about the specific problem. So for example, if you're talking about a company, you're talking to a company that sells a product to help retail salespeople be able to sell more when somebody walks into their shoe store and buys their shoes. Talk to me about why it's hard to be a retail salesperson. Talk to me about why it's so hard to sell as a retail salesperson. Talk to me about why you think my product actually helps somebody in a role like that, right? Again, it'll show the depth of your expertise and why you believe in their product and the service. And it's no longer something superficial. Now you're starting to convince me the value that you can bring in the organization. And that's really what you're trying to do anytime you talk to an employer. You're not just trying to say how great your experience is or why it's or that it's relevant. Demonstrate to me why it's relevant. Demonstrate to me by showing your unique understanding and expertise of the space. And for that, you have to obviously practice what stories you're going to tell. And part of that is also the industry knowledge that you might have and the vocabulary. Your ability to use the right vocabulary that shows your expertise in that sector is going to convince somebody. The specificity is going to convince somebody that you have the ability to do that job. So again, remember, it's really about sharing those specific stories. And you might be wondering, why aren't people believing you that you have that expertise, that it's valuable? Well, maybe it's because you're just saying that you did the work. You're not telling me about, you're not demonstrating, what is it that you uniquely know because you spent some time and either in that work or time researching that industry on the side, if it's something that you do for fun. The last part that we want to talk about here, and folks, we have probably another, 10 minutes or so, 5 or 10 minutes here in the presentation. So do start thinking of questions that you might have that maybe we didn't address, or anything that we said. Hey, if you think that something that we said is, you don't believe it, write that in the chat, and we'll help clarify and why we truly believe everything that we're saying here and why it's really important. But finally, we do want to talk about the importance of being a self-starter, and there's nothing more disappointing to me when I talk to a candidate for our program, or somebody that I'm offering to make an introduction to a tech employer, right? Luckily, I have Vadim and I both have a pretty good network here that we have the luxury to do that for people. Nothing more disappointing to me than when somebody comes to me and they says, "Yeah, I've been applying to jobs for a year and nothing is happening, and I don't know why." And when I ask them, "Okay, well, what else have you been up to? Have you worked on any projects? Have you done anything to show that you're filling the time somehow in between?" And the answer is no. And I say, that's a wasted year, because you could have been doing projects that would make for really great stories for employers in this year. Just because you haven't had a job doesn't mean you have to wait for permission to show somebody that you can take initiative and you can actually create something and solve problems for them. So again, the advice that we're sharing here, you don't have to go out and do all of these things. What we're asking for you to do is, if you have been at a standstill and you're not really getting the opportunities that you want, or it's been hard for you to transition to a new industry or a new role, stop waiting for permission and actually start working on things that can help you tell those stories that we've been talking about this whole conversation, right? Choose one thing that you can do in the next 2 or 3 months, or even in the next 2 or 3 weeks, that can demonstrate your ability to actually have these projects that you can talk about. And that is really what being a self-starter is all about. And it manifests itself in different ways depending on who you are and what your interests are and what your capabilities are, right? So again, it could be as simple as starting a club if you're still in school or still in college, right? To show your organizational abilities, to show your ability to dive deep in a particular topic. You've been wanting to get into the cryptocurrency space for the last year. Well, again, show me what you've done. Maybe you started a club on campus around crypto and you invited some cool speakers to talk to people around that, right? It shows me now you have more than a superficial understanding, and you're not just somebody that says I'm interested in something. You're actually going out there and doing something about it. Building a community and organizing events, right? Aside from starting a club, you don't have to be in college to organize events. When I came to New York, when Vadim and I came to New York, we had no network, no friends. We didn't know anybody. We started off hosting events on meetup.com, just to essentially show people that, you know, we have the ability to be organizers and we can host events and we can bring people in, and you know, now we have an ability to speak in public now too. So just a lot of things that we can say that we've done. Volunteering and, you know, let's say doing outreach for local small businesses and saying, okay, hey, local nonprofit here, it looks like you have a lot of problems with your website, or you have no social media presence at all, and you're somebody that's interested in a marketing job. Go out there and ask for a nonprofit to volunteer to spruce up their website, or to create a social media account for them and grow it for about 2 months and grow it to even 100 followers. But then you have that experience, and you know, again, you didn't get paid for it, maybe even because they didn't have budget to pay you, but now you have something you can talk about that you created from nothing, and you helped a local company, and you can say it's consulting experience even if you didn't get paid for it. Helping brands access communities that you're a part of is another way to do it, right? So maybe you already are part of a given community. It doesn't matter what the community is, right? It could be an interest group. It could be dog moms of the internet, right? It could be LGBTQ community that you're part of. It doesn't matter what the community is, but if you have a network or a community that you're already a part of, or Facebook groups or Instagram accounts, whatever it might be, you may reach out to certain brands and say, hey, I can help you get access to these communities because I think your product could really benefit them. All of a sudden, now you're helping brands get access to communities and grow their audience. Maybe they'll hire you. And if they don't hire you, you can use that as a story for somebody else to say how you helped another company leverage a community. And then finally, starting some sort of content. In my example, I mentioned podcasting. You could start a blog. Again, you don't have to write a blog for 3 years, but again, just to show that, hey, it's beyond you just saying I'm interested in something. You actually went out there, you created content around it, you organized information in a way that shows that you've done more than just initial research on something. Anything that you can do that can show that you've started to really demonstrate your curiosity in something, and to demonstrate your ability to develop something, even if it's not, you know, something that was paid, is going to help you in your interview processes, regardless of the experience that you have. And oftentimes those are the stories that interviewers really latch on to, because they want to know, what was it like hosting your event? Tell me more about that. What was hard about that? What was it like starting a podcast? You know, that's really cool. I want to learn more about that. That's what you're looking for, the kind of stories you're looking to tell, to let yourself really stand apart and stand out in an organization. Finally, you know, displaying these things. So you're a self-starter. You've started doing some of these things, right? That's hopefully understand the value of it. How do you display these things? Again, it doesn't have to be like a startup that you started. Actually, I was talking to somebody a couple of weeks ago who was interviewing for one of our programs, and he told me that he built he built an app. Now, he never got any users for the app, but he built an app, and they did a bunch of user testing and all this stuff. And he never had it on his resume. You would have no idea looking at it that he created an app from nothing, even though he's not a developer. And right away, I told him, like, you need to include these stories. Just because you didn't build a startup, but you built a simple app, doesn't mean you can't include that as a great story. Again, don't worry, as a recap, don't worry if it took you a lot of time, and it wasn't a full-time job that you did. Really focus on the impact and the product and what you did, right? So let's say in that example of that app that he built, well, he didn't get any customers, but he did talk to 50 people to try to figure out how to prioritize features. That is exactly what a product manager does. And now he can use that as a story. And before, he didn't think that that was something worthwhile talking about. If you hosted an event, even with 20 people, but you did it for 3 months, and every time you had 20 people come, again, that is something that's really substantial. It's not easy to get 20 people to come to an event, right? So talking about those stories, again, that's something that is really, again, most people don't think they can talk about, but you should and you can. If you're in that situation, and you can talk about it on your LinkedIn and other parts of your personal brand online. And then, you know, again, anything you can do to demonstrate the impact. For example, if you host an event, you got a great speaker that can be a great logo or something like that. Or if you wrote a blog, and for that blog, you interviewed somebody that worked at Google or something like that. Again, that shows that you have an aptitude and an ability to get information and do something impressive, and you want to talk about that. I want to spend the last 3 minutes here talking about how to take all of this and really start applying it to getting opportunities in tech. And obviously, again, the first step is to really figure out, how do you package your experiences and stories to be attractive? If you don't have any good experiences or stories, it's time to spend the next 2 or 3 or 4 months developing those, so you have stuff to talk about when you're applying, when you're asking people for introductions, or when you're interviewing. But again, it helps once you've developed some of these skills and start developing that domain expertise. As Vadim mentioned a few minutes ago, it really helps to have a targeted approach. What that means is you're not just applying to a bunch of different roles with a bunch of different job titles at different companies that you don't even care about. You're really focusing your approach on companies that you really think can have an impact, that you have a passion working for, that you're going to go the extra mile to try and get in front of it and prove your value to, right? That's going to have better dividends. And if you can then tie that to your domain expertise, what we talked about here before, the thing that you spend a lot of time thinking about and doing, the passion is going to come through when you talk about it in the interviews and when you're applying or when you're going to ask for those introductions. So again, really the one important thing that's going to really help you go from 0 to 1 here and accelerate your path into new roles is really figuring out, how do I have a focused and targeted approach to going after the right companies and the right roles where it's going to be believable that I can do the job and I have some expertise around. And then once you figure that targeted approach and what that is, then it's about creating some sort of advantage for yourself to start building out your network, even if you don't have one. Obviously, in the scope of this conversation, we don't have so much time to give you a bunch of networking advice, because really today, the point of today was to talk about how to position yourself as somebody that's attractive to jobs in tech, so people want to hire you. But, you know, again, when it comes to developing your network, this is something that we go more in depth in our program. And actually, that's something that every single person that goes through our career accelerator, by the end of the program, they have to have a much bigger network, because from day one, they're starting outreach. We're teaching them how to do cold outreach. We're teaching them how to use their network to grow their network from there. But start with what you have. Start with who you already know. Even if you haven't talked to your classmate in 2 years, reach out to her if she works for a company that's interesting for you, or she might know somebody on LinkedIn that's interesting to you. Ask if you can speak for a few minutes, you know, talk about your interests, talk about your expertise that you've developed, ask for that introduction, do informational interviews. Start really thinking about it as a process, right? So instead of going and applying to 100 jobs in the next, 2 months, go out there and start making lists of people that you can reach out to that can give you introductions or create opportunities for you, even if those are cold or not super warm people. Once you start project managing it and treating it as a true funnel, you will start getting results. Start with 10 people. Hopefully by the end of the month, you have 30 or 40 people that you can reach out to. And by then, before you know it, you will really be developing your network. Again, this is something that we dive much deeper in our program. So unfortunately, we can't cover too much of it now, but we can help answer any final questions that we'll have here. Vadim and I are going to stay for about 5 minutes here. If you want to talk about networking, if you want to dive a little deeper into anything we've talked about here, use the chat in the next few minutes as we wrap up here. I do want to mention, if you want access to this recording, please fill out the survey. It takes just 1 minute, but we love to hear from folks about what went well about in the event, what you wish you learned, what you loved learning, anything we can do to make it better. It just takes a minute, but we'll send you that recording if you fill out that survey. It's just school16.co/survey. And that is really the conclusion of our event. On our website, you can find that program link if you do want to apply to that program. Make sure you do it today so that we can see your application come through and have time to give you an interview. Otherwise, we'd love to answer any questions that you might have here in the last few minutes here in the chat. I'm going to pull up, I'm going to stop actually sharing my screen here so that I can see what is going on here in the chat, if there's anything. So folks, it looks like I don't see anything new in the Q&A. Vadim just dropped that survey link here, and the program link is right above it. Folks, final questions here as we wrap up. We still have 12 of you here in the call, it looks like. So we're here to answer any questions that you might have if maybe we didn't touch on something. And again, you can drop it in the chat or in the Q&A. I know we have folks here from different backgrounds and experiences, so hopefully this was helpful to you. Please write us and leave it in the survey if there was something else that could have been more helpful. We'll include it in another event. We actually have an event happening on Wednesday as well. And Vadim, can you remind me what we're diving into on that event on Wednesday?
Yeah, sorry, I was on mute.
Yeah, that's okay.
Yeah, we're going to be expanding on some of the topics we talked about today, but the title of the event is Getting into Tech Without Much Experience. So what kind of roles you can break into. We'll probably touch a little bit more on the last bit that we touched on today, which is how to develop your network quickly to access opportunities and the like. Again, creating more and more unfair advantage to get in front of opportunities, even if you don't have a ton of experience.
Great.
And it's going to be more of a roundtable discussion.
Yeah, so join us for that if you can. Stay tuned for other events that we'll be hosting in the next month or so. Otherwise, thank you so much for joining us. We know folks from all parts of the country and the world join us here today, so it was really great to have you. We loved, obviously, hopefully you could tell that Vadim and I love talking about these topics. So if you ever have any questions or if you want more information, you can go on our website. There's a lot of resources there, and you can reach out to us as well. But thank you so much. So Neil, thank you for the great questions, and all the folks that were here as well. Belen, of course, good to have you. Thank you so much, folks, and we'll see you in a couple of days, hopefully. If not, then we'll see you in the inbox. We send emails pretty regularly about events that we have going on. So we'd love to hear from you and see you at a future event. Thanks, everybody.